'Twas the night before Christmas, and deep in the house a creature was stirring, ready to pounce. The stockings were hung by the chimney with care, whilst phantom footsteps ascended the stair. The children were nestled, all snug in their beds, but a dark shadow figure loomed over their heads. And Mama in her kerchief, and I in my cap, were about to be woken by one ghostly rap.
Hi, I'm Lil.
And I'm Fitz.
And you're listening to a very tinsely episode of Knock Once for Yes.
I was thinking of beginning the episode with my own rendition of Noddy Holder of Slade's It's Christmas! But I thought I'd give you all a Christmas present by saving your eardrums from that particular form of torture. But it is Christmas again. Happy holidays, everybody, whatever festival you're celebrating. And if you don't have any particular festivals or celebrations at this time of year, then you are still more than welcome to join us for a little bit of creepy fun. As usual, we have been scrambling to get the Christmas special episode done amongst all the other tasks that need doing, like Christmas shopping and catching up with family, but we made it. Just. So, get your Christmas crackers on standby and buckle up for the Knock Once for Yes Christmas Special 2024.
So, Fitz, what have we got coming up on this, quite frankly, mince pie flavoured episode?
Coming up with this episode, we have an old favourite on the Paranormal Radar who has some thoughts on both Santa Claus and, somewhat bizarrely, Swindon Town Football Club.
Very festive.
Indeed. We have listener stories from Caroline, Rowan, Verity, and a short story from Mateo Oxley. We tread the boards in search of ghosts at the Theatre Royal in Bath, and get ready to play along with the inaugural game of Pretentious Word Bingo. And, of course, the terribly cheesy KOFY Christmas quiz.
But before we get stuck into all of that, we want to say a huge thank you to our latest patrons,
Nicholas Greenway and Arian.
And thank you so much to Lisa for donating via Ko-fi. Thank you to all of our patrons and everyone who has donated to the show. We're deeply grateful for your support this year and every year. And we're hoping to get some time over the holidays to get some of the extra content we've been working on out on Patreon, for we have many adventures to share with you guys. And we have a couple of special thank yous as well this episode. Firstly, to Debbie, thank you for being the spirit of the Knock Once for Yes Facebook group this year. We are always a little bit scatty with social media, this year in particular, so we've really appreciated your posts. And we also want to say thank you to Verity for giving us an early Christmas present this year. Now, if you're a regular listener, you'll have probably heard us saying for a while now that we have nearly run out of listener stories to share. Only it turned out that we hadn't at all. In fact, the submission form on our website had been safely squirreling away the stories you guys have been sending us for possibly months. And although they're all safe and sound, it had basically hidden them. And it had given us no idea that they were there, no notifications at all. So we had no idea that they existed or that there was a problem with the website. So it was only when Verity got in touch with us to say that she hadn't had a confirmation on sending in her story that we realised there was something amiss, checked the website and realised that there was a problem with the form. So please don't worry, all your stories are safe and sound, but bear with us if you haven't had a reply or a confirmation. We're working through them right now, but it might take us a while because the website saved them in a really awkward format. But we're so grateful and over the moon to have them in any format. So thank you to Verity and happy Christmas to us. It's the best present ever. Now then, Fitz, what on earth has Santa Claus got to do with Swindon Town Football Club?
Well, you will see, and to be fair, Santa doesn't actually have anything to do with the football club, but we'll get to that.
He might, you don't know.
I do know, because I read the article. But It being the Christmas special, we've got a Christmas-themed Paranormal Radar story today, and we're revisiting someone we've run into before. A somewhat eccentric character, dubbed a spooky rock singer and horror influencer by Yahoo News, Brocard first came to our attention when she encountered the devilishly handsome ghost of Eduardo, the Victorian soldier, who burst into her room one night during a storm, and who she later married on Halloween in 2022. Following their marriage, which began with a rocky start as Eduardo got a bit too drunk on their honeymoon, the relationship became ever more turbulent, and Brocard even suspected Eduardo of having an affair with the ghost of Marilyn Monroe. Enough was enough for Brocard, and she decided that Eduardo had to go. But how do you get rid of a supernatural spouse? Well, after failing to assert her boundaries with the aid of a psychic and raising Eduardo's ire, she stepped up her game and returned to the chapel where they'd once joined in mystical matrimony in order to exorcise him. This time, though, she gained our attention with her thoughts on Santa, which we will get to momentarily, but she also doubled down on getting in the news this holiday season by speaking to the Swindon Advertiser about Swindon Town Football Club. Apparently, the club manager, Ian Holloway, is convinced that the team's bad luck and poor performance since his recent appointment is due to the ground being haunted. He intends to cleanse the grounds with sage, but this is where Brocard piped up to suggest that instead of banishing the ghost, Holloway should embrace it instead, saying, "With some ghosts on the side, the team could be winning the Premier League in no time." Though the article fails to relate if Brocard had any suggestions on how to utilise the spirits to aid the team in doing so. More relevant to our purposes, she also featured in Yahoo News with a story about Santa. She says her now banished ex Eduardo used to love Christmas, dressing up as Santa and floating down the chimney on Christmas Eve.
Carry on.
No comment. She believes that other spirits may also get in on the action too, sensing the excitement around the festive season and wanting to celebrate alongside us, sometimes presenting themselves as Father Christmas. I must say that this is probably the least unusual thing that Brocard has gone to the papers with. I've certainly speculated myself about some paranormal activity being created or empowered through intention, fear, or other forms of manifestation, and fans of the Newkirk Museum of the Paranormal, which we really wish would one day travel across the pond to our little corner of Blighty, will know that this is something that they have explored in an extremely fun way, not least with their annual Santa séance. If any of you are also museum members, we'll see you there. Oh, and entirely coincidentally, I'm sure it has absolutely nothing to do with her finding various reasons to make the news this Christmas, but Brocard has just released a Christmas single called Waiting for January. I'm sure it's entirely unrelated, though.
Good Lord, I feel like I've been at the eggnog too early. And I don't even drink.
Yeah, it's one of those. It was the perfect Christmas Paranormal Radar, to be honest. I looked at it and I was like, I don't need to keep looking. This is it. I've got it. I
found the one.
This is the one. This is the way.
To be fair, I agree with you on the, manifestation of spirits. And who's to say that some ghosts don't just really enjoy Christmas and want to get in the festive spirit? Maybe they do dress up. I mean, yeah. We're about to talk an awful lot about theatre ghosts who may well be in costume, so it's not really that far out the realms of where we're going today.
But if you think about the millions of children across the globe that are busy manifesting Santa on Christmas Eve, then
exactly.
That's pretty powerful, I think.
Is she literally trying to get the Christmas number one then?
I'm not exactly going to place bets on her having the Christmas number one.
Fair enough. Well, from one kind of ridiculousness to another, it's nearly time for our first Christmas quiz question. We are about to get stuck into the stories. As always, if you're regular listeners, you know how this works. If it's your first time joining us for the KOFY Christmas special, what we will do is we will both fire off KOFY Christmas quiz question at each other. We will then give ourselves and you, the listeners, time to ruminate, think about what the answer might be while we have a listener story. And then we will come back and swap answers. Well, we'll try and guess the answers first. And then when we both inevitably get it wrong, we will tell each other the correct answers.
We take this quiz very seriously. Very seriously. We go to separate rooms and we write our quiz questions, and we have to be very careful. If we hear the other one coming, it's like, no, you can't come in. I'm doing my quiz.
That is true, actually. That is true. We also, as we mentioned earlier, have a new game this year. We're going to have Pretentious Word Bingo. We'll talk more about that later. You don't need to worry about that yet, but you might want a piece of paper and a pencil at some point before we get to the main segment. So, who's going to go first with the first quiz question?
Ladies first?
If you so desire. Okay, are you ready?
I am ready.
Theatres
Yes.
are rife with superstition. Now, you've likely all heard of things like never whistling on stage, never saying the Scottish play instead of the other thing that's bad luck to say, and I don't know if it applies to podcasts, but I'm not going to risk it. And apparently, so many of them are haunted that oftentimes cast and crew take to blaming their resident ghosts for mishaps and mistakes. Props going missing, missed cues, torn costumes, all get blamed on the unfortunate ghosts. But if they don't have a handily culpable spirit of their own, there is another spirit that is blamed for theatre mishaps all across the land, as they have a connection to all theatres and actors, and really anyone and anything to do with stage acting as we know it. But whose spirit is it that gets the blame when things go wrong?
Oh, I feel like I should know this.
I kind of think you do, and actually now I've said it out loud, I'm slightly worried we may have done this one before the show before in some format. I hope not.
It's not ringing a bell,
No.
and I can see why you went with the acting theme.
Well,
being the
to be
theatre
perfectly
episode.
honest, I will come clean. All of my questions are theatre themed because basically I didn't have time to do very much research apart from the mountain of research I did for the main segment. So, dear listeners, you're getting not only a theatre-themed main segment, but also theatre-themed questions from moi today.
Well, mine are mostly Christmas-themed, so we've just
Fair
come
enough.
at it from a different angle.
Fair
you see.
enough. I like it.
Indeed. So I'll have a think.
Okay.
I've got a couple of ideas, but I'm not confident. I'm not certain. But I shall have a think about it. And first, I shall read you my question, and then we'll hop on to the stories.
Far away.
So, having Polish ancestry, I've already shared with you some Polish Christmas traditions, like leaving a place at the table spare at Christmas Eve dinner. In Norway, they have a similar tradition. Can you tell me what it is that Norwegians are supposed to leave empty on Christmas Eve?
Ooh, no, not off the top of my head. I feel like I'm not going to get a point for this one, but I will give it due consideration.
Indeed. Think about things you might find in a house.
Oh, yeah, that really narrows it down. Thanks, dude. Especially if it's our house.
Yeah, we do have an eclectic collection of weird things.
We're wombles, is what he's saying.
Indeed.
So, while you, dear listeners, are thinking about your Christmas quiz answers, because we do want you to join in, score yourselves if you want to. We've usually forgotten the score by the end of the show, but that is neither here nor there.
Indeed. So, to give you time to ruminate over your answers, it's time now for our first listener story of the episode, and this one is from Caroline.
I recently moved into a small flat in St Albans. My building was originally a terraced family home that was later split into 2 flats. My upstairs neighbour's door opens directly onto the stairs, and my front door opens onto what would have been the corridor next to the staircase before it was walled off. I think it's a post-war build, but it does have a fireplace that seems older, so it may have been a dwelling that was simply expanded after the war. Before I was diagnosed with ADHD, I lost things so frequently that I referred to it as the universe playing "Where did Caroline put?" Since the diagnosis and subsequent treatment, which occurred before I moved in, I haven't really had such a big problem with losing things. But when I took up residence in my quirky accommodation, it started again. However, I noticed that as soon as I became visibly frustrated, I'd turn, and whatever I was looking for would be somewhere obvious. The middle of the bed, on the table, shelf, you name it. It never felt malicious, but it was curiously consistent. And it intensified immediately after I spent a day listening to haunted podcasts, including yours. One day I was looking for my earbuds, and on a whim I said, "Please can I have my earbuds back? I don't want to go out wearing big headphones because I won't hear what's going on around me as well, and I want to be able to hear cars." Silence, but a keen sense of confusion filled the room. I added, "The small black box with round black earrings in, I'm looking for that." Immediately, I looked under the bed. They were right there, right on top, in a plastic box with no lid that I'd put under the bed the week before. Weird, because I'd used those earbuds the day before, and I'd forgotten I'd even put that plastic box under the bed whilst unpacking. So how did they get there? Initially, I'd engage, ask them for whatever it was I couldn't find, and the pattern continued. Then I got a bit nervous about engaging with the entity and stopped asking for things. Losing things ramped up, almost like it was annoyed I wasn't acknowledging it anymore. I returned to asking for things, and it returned to normal. The most recent instance was yesterday. I bought a baguette and couldn't find it. I asked for it back and found it a few minutes later on top of the laundry basket in the bathroom. Don't worry, it was still in its bag and sealed. I've named my houseguest, or maybe housegeist, Fred. I thank Fred for letting me be in his space and continue our strange little game of hide and seek. I'm wary of giving them personification, but nothing about this feels malicious. I have 2 guinea pigs, and whilst I'll admit they're probably not as observant as cats, they do startle easily, and they have been absolutely fine here. I think Fred's just a spirit that likes a bit of a joke and looking after the house. I do wish he'd pick up his share of the housework, though. I've lived in haunted places before. On previous episodes, you kindly shared my stories about the haunted farmhouse I spent my teen years in, but that was different. That house felt heavy. We instinctively knew not to acknowledge it. I wouldn't stay there alone at night, even as an adult. But this is just a nice haunting, which is, well, nice. I'm interested in your thoughts. Is it safe to engage with Fred? Should I be doing anything specifically? If any other listeners have any ideas or advice, I'm all ears. I don't want to offend my resident ghoul.
And thank you to Caroline for sharing that story with us. And to be honest, I think my first response is, sounds like you've got it under control.
Yeah, mine too. I mean, if you're a regular listener of the show, you've probably heard us talk before about how we talk to our ghosts in exactly the same way. I mean, we're probably quite an extreme end of the spectrum. We kind of treat our ghosts like guests, well, like part of the family, really.
Well, I think one of them at least is part of the family.
Well, yes.
So,
yeah, that's true.
We definitely do that. Like, we set things out for them for the occasional.
I've just put up their Christmas tree.
Yeah.
They have their own little Christmas tree.
Yeah.
I say goodnight to them every night and say thank you for looking after the house when we've been out.
Yeah, when they start making noises or I see them in the mirror or something, it's just, hi, Jack.
Yeah.
It's all pretty friendly, and that's kind of the way it stays, really.
Yeah, I mean, it wasn't always like that. It did freak us out to start with, and we didn't acknowledge it at that point. It wasn't really a conscious decision. It was just that to start with, we didn't really understand what was going on, and we didn't really know what to do. If anything, it didn't occur to us to just kind of talk to them. And to be honest, all that kind of strange activity, which was actually quite a lot of things going missing, wasn't it? It was things going missing, things appearing in the middle of the floor from out of nowhere. There was stuff we couldn't find for ages. that all actually stopped when we started acknowledging them and just started talking to them as if they were people and treating them as part of the house.
Yeah, I hadn't considered it that way before, but now that I look back on it, it does almost feel like it was trying to attract our attention. And then once it was aware that we were paying attention, it was fine.
Yeah, they were quite happy. I don't think I think you're right though, Caroline. That's not the case in every haunting necessarily. There are definitely houses that we've been to and lived in where it was a different kind of feeling. But I think you just know that instinctively.
And perhaps not first of all, like I can understand if you're hearing, cupboards in your house bang and there's nobody else home, or you hear footsteps when there's nobody there. It can be scary, it can be intimidating, but it doesn't mean that it is. That it's like when you walk around a corner and somebody's there and you're not expecting them to, and it's fine. It's not actually scary, but it still makes you jump. It still gets that adrenaline going. So it's entirely understandable that even if whatever is there isn't malicious in any way, it can still make you jump. So don't feel just because something's made you jump, that's made you scared, that it's definitely scary and malicious.
Yeah.
So that's kind of my advice. I mean, specifically, you asked what we thought, and I think you've got it covered. It sounds like you're doing exactly what you need to. It's appreciating being acknowledged, and it sounds like you've got quite a fun little housegeist.
I love that term, housegeist. I think that's brilliant. I mean, the only thing I would say is if it gets kind of annoying and you don't want to do it anymore, and you feel like whatever's going on is starting to just kind of be frustrating, then I would consider just having that conversation out loud and saying, it's not that I want to ignore you, and I'm happy that we can just get on in this space together, and I want that to continue, but this is getting kind of difficult for me. Can you please stop hiding my stuff? I'd really appreciate it if you just didn't do that. Perhaps we can do something else. Perhaps I can leave you a coffee out once a month or something instead.
Personal space, Fred. Personal space.
And actually, that's something I've definitely done here. That's, again, it wasn't a conscious choice. So I don't know. It's just something I naturally did. We kind of made a space for our ghosts that was their space. That's where their Christmas tree is, for example. It's where some of the photos of family members who we think might be the ghosts live. They've kind of got their own place to hang out, and things aren't always quiet. They definitely make their presence known sometimes, but not in any kind of frustrating or particularly scary way.
No.
And I think we kind of came to that peace, like that kind of coexistence, when we started speaking to them, treating them like that house guest and giving them their own space. So that might be something to consider. Just a thought. By the way, I should add, when I say space, I mean like a shelf. I'm not talking about a whole room or anything. We don't live in a mansion.
So, thank you once again to Caroline for sharing that story with us. Did that give you enough time to ruminate over your answer?
Oh my goodness, no, I can't even remember what the question was. Please do tell me again.
Well, I think you asked your question first. So if you want to start with yours, and I will do my best to answer.
So my question was, traditionally in theatres, whose ghost is it that will often get blamed for mishaps?
Right. So I remember you saying as part of the question that it was something to do with all theatres.
Yep.
So
this ghost has got a connection to the whole acting world as we know it today.
So this has got to be ancient.
Yes.
Because when I think all theatres, I'm going all the way back to the sort of Greeks and Romans, or possibly before that.
Yeah. Ancient is a good way to go.
So I'm thinking about the ancient Greek gods, and I'm really annoyed because I've just remembered. I was going to say the only ones I could remember were the Roman ones, and I'm thinking maybe like a messenger god. So I was originally thinking Mercury, which is of course in the Greek pantheon Hermes.
You're looking at me like I know.
So I'm going to guess that it's Hermes.
You're going to kick yourself when I tell you, because I know you probably don't know this, but you would have been able to work it out. So it's not a god, but you were right. It's an ancient Greek. It's an ancient Greek man, though, not a god.
Okay.
From the 6th century BC. Now I've said that, did you want another guess?
Well, I can think of philosophers. I'm struggling specifically for actors.
Okay, I'm going to tell you. It's the ghost of Thespis. As in thespian.
Ah.
I told you you'd kick yourself.
Oh, that's so annoying.
Thespis was an ancient Greek poet and actor from the 6th century BC. He's said to have either been the first person to appear in a play acting as a character rather than playing himself, essentially, or to be, that people can't decide, or to have been the first person to step out of the chorus and take a role as a principal actor. He is also credited with inventing the style of play called a tragedy and the phenomenon of theatrical touring. And of course, as I just mentioned, he gave his name to actors of future generations in the word thespian.
I didn't know it, so I wasn't aware of the name.
No,
so
but you probably could have worked it out.
And if it was just have a stab at guessing, possibly could have done it. But I'm not too ashamed of my attempt.
No, it was good.
But yeah, so far, 0 points. Nul point for Fitz. So
remind me of your question again, and I'll probably get it wrong.
So if you remember, at Christmas Eve dinner for Polish families, we leave a space spare at the Christmas Eve dinner table, just in case somebody turns up, or potentially for missing family members to turn up and have a plate. In Norway, they leave something else empty. Can you tell me what that is?
And it's something like a household object was the clue, was it?
It's something that you would find in a house.
That could be anything. Well, my first thought is something like shoes or boots, because that is, you know, a Christmas tradition is to leave out shoes and boots, empty shoes and boots, to be filled by St. Nicholas or other visiting spirits. But I'm guessing it's not that, because that's really obvious.
No, that is a different thing.
Yeah.
Like, that's like leaving it to have gifts put inside. I was thinking
this is leaving something
spare.
empty. Oh, yeah. Leaving spare. Oh my goodness, what else would you leave spare? I mean, if it's not a seat at the table, what else? A bed?
Well done, you got it. Yep, it's their beds.
1 point for me.
Indeed. In the Polish tradition, a place is left set at the table in case unexpected visitors arrive, and they're able to join the meal and the celebrations, very much in keeping with the hospitality, which is a trait of the Poles.
Yeah.
This is believed to originate from a custom that both the Poles and Norwegians share, a feast for the ancestors.
Oh.
In Poland, after everyone was finished eating, the food was left on the table when everyone vacated after the meal so that the ancestors could have a couple of hours undisturbed for their own celebration. In Norway, this tradition is taken a little further, as not only the remains of the meal is left for the ancestors, but the fire is built up, fresh candles lit, and the beds made, only for them to withdraw and allow the ancestor spirits not just a meal, but a night in a freshly made bed. And the homeowners would bed down on straw to leave the beds empty.
Oh, that is so lovely. And do you know what? That's so funny, because we were literally just talking about leaving a space for our house ghosts and ancestors and them having their own Christmas tree. And honestly, that was not planned at all. I had no idea that was going to be Fitz's question.
Well, you nailed it. And there's, in fact, a fabulous little bit of folklore that's arisen to try and retroactively explain the tradition. And even though it's apparently a commonly told story, it's likely anachronistic and more modern than the tradition itself. But it goes like this. On the farm Kvam in Ireland, every year, the trolls used to chase people out of the house on Christmas Eve and take the Yule feast for themselves. Then one year, a stranger with a gun came to the farm on Christmas Eve, asking if he could stay the night. The wife on the farm said that they would be happy to have him, but they were so badly plagued by the trolls that they couldn't even stay in the house themselves. There might be a cure for that, said the man. When evening came and the feast was set out, the man loaded his rifle with a silver button and hid on a large shelf along the wall. And sure enough, before long, a large group filed into the house, led by a huge troll named Trond. Trond took the high seat, and when he sat, his nose was so long it nearly touched the table. One of the trolls went down into the cellar, coming back with an olshenia, which is a beer bowl. Once up in the hall, he lifted the bowl and drank, saying, "This I give to you, Trond." In the same moment, the man hidden on the shelf said, "This I give to you, Trond," and fired at the troll chief, who toppled over. The trolls broke up in confusion and fled, screaming as they left, "Yule in Quam was short this year."
Christmas Eve story time with Fitz.
Indeed, I really enjoyed that. I found it when I was looking through the stories, and I know it's likely untrue because the first record of this is long after the tradition was originally recorded.
But that's folklore, isn't it? Folklore evolves. It doesn't always have to be like the original. I know we kind of, when we do research for the episodes, we always talk about trying to get back to the original, the word before it becomes word of mouth.
Yeah.
But that's kind of different. Like, we're talking about folklore and legends here, and they're meant to evolve with people.
Yeah, definitely. I think one of the big things about traditional folklore is that, as you say, it does evolve. Like, it tends to be spread through word of mouth, and it travels from place to place, and the characters change.
Yeah, and that's cool.
We had that story a little while ago where every generation, the villain of the story was replaced by the latest evil lord of the manor.
Yeah, I'd forgotten about that.
Yeah.
And that was really interesting. Actually, it happens quite a lot in ghost folklore as well. Yeah.
So I enjoyed that one. So well done. Well, I mean, good guess.
I can't believe I got one right already.
Yeah, so 1-0 to Lil. You're doing well. I get the feeling I'm probably not going to win the quiz this year. I don't think I've ever won the quiz, have I?
I don't know. To be fair, you did give me a lot of clues, though. I tried to give you some clues, but I guess my questions are a bit hard.
I was satisfied with my logic, but disappointed that I didn't get that one. So yes, well done.
Thank you.
1-0 to Lil.
Well, that means that it's time for the next quiz questions, so that we can all think about our answers before we get into another listener story. Would you like to go first this time?
I can go first if you like.
Mm-hmm.
So, Christmas pudding is ubiquitous on a traditional British Christmas dinner menu, the highlight of consuming which is dousing it in brandy and lighting it for a bit of a spectacle. However, from about the 16th century until at least the Victorian period, it was very popular to light another foodstuff on fire on Christmas Eve. Can you tell me what it was? And I'll give you a bonus half point for any of the substitute ingredients that might also be used if the specified treat was unable to be found.
Oh my goodness, I have absolutely no clue. But I will think about it. Probably that 1 point would be the only one I'll get today.
Well, here's hoping I can recover my point on your question.
Well, this is just so... I don't know whether you'll get this. It's probably a bit of an unfair question, but it's just so funny. I had to put it in.
I can live with funny. It's fine. I'll lose this one for a joke. It's not a problem.
So, going back to thespians. If we have any thespians listening today, they may have heard of 18th century actor David Garrick, who essentially grandfathered the modern naturalistic style of acting still used today. But if you haven't heard of him, don't worry, you will very soon when we get to our main segment. But apart from his acting style, he was also famous for his portrayal of Hamlet, a play that has 3 ghostly appearances, one of which, the Danish prince's first encounter with the ghost, caused quite a stir with the audience during David Garrick's performance. So can you tell me, why did David Garrick's wig become so famous in this scene of Hamlet?
I do not know offhand. Again, I kind of feel like I ought to know.
You can probably just have a stab.
Yeah, I've got an idea, and I'm wondering if it's on a similar theme to my question. But
really?
We will find out.
Well, this is a good question. Just have a stab in the dark.
I will certainly have a go.
Well, time for our next listener story while we all ruminate on that. And this one is from Rowan.
I have only felt comfortable opening up about these events in more recent years. I had an unusual time growing up, thanks to experiencing regular phenomena in my childhood home. It started around the year 2000 when I was 10. I would be lying in bed during the early hours of the morning and suddenly hear touch typing coming from the desktop computer downstairs. I didn't think much of it at first. My parents worked from home, and it wasn't uncommon to wake up and hear Mum typing away at the computer. One morning, I heard the touch typing again. I got up and called out to Mum, assuming she was down there working. No answer. No one was down there at all. I was convinced I heard typing. This began to happen regularly. I figured that I was so used to hearing typing from downstairs that I was starting to hear things that weren't there. Because of this, I didn't mention anything to anyone. I thought I was going crazy. This happened at random intervals, only between the hours of approximately 3 to 8 a.m. The sound of fast, manic typing and fast, furious clicking of a mouse as if someone was frustrated. The study where this took place was directly beneath my bedroom. One morning, I was eating breakfast when I heard Mum at the top of the stairs. "You're not down there on the computer already?" I froze and ran out to her. I was amazed she heard it too. She was convinced she heard typing, and yet nobody was down there. I told her about all the times I'd been hearing it, and then my sister revealed that she had regularly been hearing it too. I wasn't crazy after all. On one occasion, unbeknownst to me at the time, my sister actually went down there upon hearing the typing. She was looking for our Mum, figuring she must be down there. It had stopped the moment she began walking down. She freaked out once she checked the garage and realised Mum had gone out for groceries and nobody else was home. I set out to try to catch whatever was causing it, to try to discover a rational explanation for everything. It wasn't the most sophisticated ghost hunting, I was just a kid, and would sprint out of my bedroom to the top of the stairs where I could look down into the room and see if anyone was at the computer. No such luck. Each time I got there, it stopped. It went on for years. We just learned to live with it because it didn't happen every day. The room was always cold. The phenomenon was most active when my sister and I hit puberty and our parents divorced. Understandably, there was a lot of energy in the house. At one point, my naive young self set up a Ouija board. I didn't have any success, but that night I had the worst fever dream, waking up feeling sick to my stomach. I never touched a Ouija board again. Things only escalated moving forward. I was down there at night when the ceiling globe light in the centre of the room began flashing very fast, strobe-like. It then exploded, sending glass across the room. I was terrified when it started happening and ran out of the room. It was lucky I did, because if I hadn't, I would have been struck with the shards of that light bulb. Not long after, I was on the computer at night, home by myself, when something happened that resulted in me never being alone in that room again. I felt and heard a really sharp intake of breath directly behind my right shoulder near my ear. I'd never run so fast in my life. I was hesitant to go into that room ever again. Prior to these incidents, the typing thing had mostly just been some weird and spooky thing, not sinister, not dangerous. It still makes my heart race thinking about it. It never occurred to me that whatever it was, it may have been mimicking our mother typing, trying to lure us downstairs and into that room. The house was sold in 2006 or 2007. In 2021, both neighbouring houses surprisingly went on the market at the same time and sold shortly after. We went to have a look. Our childhood home had changed a lot. The garden had become completely overgrown. Trees and vines were out of control, and the grass stood tall. There were cracks in the brickwork, paint chipped away. It actually looks haunted now. The person we sold it to had also made interesting additions to the surrounding fences. They've been dramatically extended in height and resemble those you would find at a zoo, like a type of enclosure designed to prevent something escaping. Maybe it was too late. Perhaps something did escape, and this is why the neighbours sold up within days of each other. We've never been able to find a proper explanation for all that we experienced in that house. It certainly makes for interesting childhood memories.
And thank you so much to Rowan for sharing that story. It must have been so frustrating and frightening hearing that going on all the time, but never ever catching what was making it, for it to just stop every time you went down and never finding out what was causing it, especially when other people in the household were hearing it as well. Looking at that from the flip side, though, I know Rowan mentioned that they were a little bit concerned that the sound might have been trying to lure them downstairs, which is concerning. But on the other hand, every time one of them did go downstairs, it just stopped.
Yeah.
Nothing else happened. It quit, which is odd.
Yeah, it's definitely an interesting one, and it's difficult to come down on one side or the other. As we were saying earlier after the previous story, a lot of these things, when they happen, they feel terrifying.
Absolutely.
And sometimes it turns out that they're not, and sometimes it is just always pretty creepy. And it's difficult from a sort of third-party recipient of a story to say for definite. Like, there were things like the light bulb. Yes, light bulbs do occasionally blow up, but was it flashing to say, danger, get out the room, this is going to explode?
Yeah, you could take it either way, couldn't you? That flashing, the strobing could have been a warning to get to safety before the shards of glass went flying everywhere, but it could also just have been, almost like poltergeist activity, and it's really difficult to say.
And I think the one that I found the most, not necessarily disturbing, but certainly raised the hairs on the back of my neck was that breath. The breath on the back of the neck. Like,
I've experienced something a little bit similar to that, and there's just no way around it. It's creepy because something's in your personal little space. Again, we will always say that, of course, it's frightening as anything in the moment, but that doesn't necessarily mean it was sinister.
Yeah, and this is the thing, like, if you did that to me, it's not creepy. Like, it can even be quite romantic, but if it's somebody that you don't know or you can't see, then that's scary as all heck.
Yeah, exactly. The neighbours moving out at the same time was very strange, and the fencing around the property.
Unusual. My first thought was, the way they described it was that sort of overhanging fence where it angles in towards the garden to stop cats getting out, but that doesn't explain why the house is badly maintained and looking like a haunted house.
I mean, sometimes I know there was a haunted house legend in my hometown, right? And it looked like a proper haunted house. So it was shuttered up, the windows were boarded, it was so overgrown, literally the plants were pushing down the brick wall around the sides of the property.
Oh, wow.
Like, that's how badly it was overgrown. It was chock full of not just weeds, but bushes, trees, everything spilling out into the street. I mean, you couldn't have designed a better haunted house if you tried. So, of course, we all thought it had been abandoned and nobody would live in it because of ghosts. It wasn't that at all. What had happened was the last owner had unfortunately died while still owning the house, but hadn't got any family to pass the house on to. So she had left it to her cats.
Okay.
Which meant there was some kind of weird legal loophole where nobody could sell the house. Like, it didn't belong to anybody. It was stuck in a legal black hole.
And this is how folklore begins.
Exactly.
That was the haunted house.
So I'm not saying that's what happened. Like, I don't know. I wasn't there. And it sounds, it's really difficult to say from our perspective, but it's just worth bearing in mind that sometimes there's a really practical reason why a house gets left like that. And sometimes it could be that if something like that had happened, the neighbours just got to the point where it was damaging their property, because that can happen, unfortunately. If you have that kind of that much overgrowth that is so bad that it starts pushing down walls and uprooting foundations and fences and goodness knows what, they might have just got sick of it and moved. Or it could have been an absolutely terrifying poltergeist that was flitting between property to property. I don't know.
Could have been. I'd be interested to know if you ever go back whether you could do the old knock on the door. I used to live here. If there's anybody living in it.
If there's anybody there.
It doesn't sound like there is at the minute, or at least the last time you visited, but I'd be interested to find out.
But the other really interesting part of this story is that it sounds like a really modern ghost. And I say that because touch typing on a computer. I know, with a mouse clicking as well. Mm-hmm. So an even more modern computer. I mean, I'm so old that when I first started using computers, we didn't have mice. They didn't have mice. They didn't exist. But we often get people say, well, how come all ghosts are Victorian, eh? Why aren't there any? If ghosts are real, why aren't there any modern ghosts? So
which I always find funny, because you hear of modern ghosts all the time.
You do, and it delights me somewhat when I get a ghost story.
This one's using Windows 10.
A really modern ghost story. But thank you so much to Rowan for sharing that with us. I'm sorry that this was understandably a really frightening experience when you were young. And I really hope that one day we find out what on earth was going on. If you do, please do let us know.
So we return to the KOFY Christmas quiz, question 2. I believe I asked my question first this time. So
you did. Do you want to give us a quick rundown again, a quick recap?
I will give you a very quick recap. It's traditional to douse your Christmas pudding in brandy and set it on fire.
Mm-hmm.
During the 16th century to the Victorian period, there was another foodstuff that British people used to set on fire on Christmas Eve. Could you tell me what it is?
And a kind of a clue in there, if I remember correctly, was the fact that it might not be available. So I want to think of something cakey, because if you pour brandy on something, like, you need the Christmas pudding to absorb it a little bit, but that's not going to be out of season, is it? That's, you're going to be able to make a Christmas pudding. What would not be available that was popular in the 16th to the...
Between the 16th century and the Victorian period.
I'm going to have a total stab in the dark and say pineapple.
I can see your logic.
But it's not that.
Sadly, it was not pineapple. The answer was, in fact, raisins.
Raisins?
And I would have accepted half points each for figs, plums, almonds, currants, grapes, or candied fruit.
It's not this Victorian game of Snapdragon.
It is the Victorian game of Snapdragon. How can you have heard of Snapdragon and not know about that?
Because I have heard of the Victorian game. Snake, I can't speak. I think I've been on the brandy. I haven't really. I've heard of the Victorian game of Snapdragon, and I was going to say that, but I mixed it up in my head, and I thought the game of Snapdragon was played with a Christmas pudding that was alight.
Very close.
Do I get like half a point for getting Snapdragon?
I'll give you half a point for Snapdragon. You're already winning, so it's, I don't know why I'm giving you bonus points, but yes. So this is the game of Snapdragon, and before I continue, I must insist that we have a disclaimer. Do not try this at home. Do not try this at home. Please, nobody go to the emergency room this Christmas. Our forebears, lacking the dizzying thrills of binge streaming, took to more hazardous fun on Christmas Eve. They would fill a shallow bowl with brandy, place raisins inside it, set it on fire, and extinguish any other light, leaving the participants bathed in the eerie blue glow of the flaming brandy. They would then snatch the raisins from the flames with their hands and extinguish them by putting them in their mouths. According to an article in Richard Steele's Tatler magazine, the wantonness of the thing was to see each other look like a demon as we burnt ourselves and snatched out the fruit. Another commenter wrote the game provided a considerable amount of laughter and merriment at the expense of the unsuccessful competitors. It seems that Johnny Knoxville and co. and the Jackass team would have fit right in 16th century Britain.
Oh my goodness, yeah, please do not try that.
Yes, do not try Snapdragon at home, please.
And do you know what the worst thing is? Do you know where I learnt about the game of Snapdragon?
Where did you learn about the game of Snapdragon?
In a children's book when I was a kid.
Yeah, and to be honest, when I was researching this, there were lots of Christmas games that I found that were incredibly dangerous.
Yeah.
Incredibly dangerous.
Yeah.
Like, there was some that it was like the intention is effectively to break people's bones.
Oh my goodness.
Yeah.
Oh.
I was like, okay. Like, these guys were a little bit scary.
We love learning about history, but let's never go back there.
Indeed. So you're 1.5 points up. I don't think I can recover at this point, but we will see.
Well, the half point's a bit sketchy. So do you want a recap of the question?
Please do. Please remind me of the question.
Okay. So we're in the 18th century. We're on stage. It's actor David Garrick's famous portrayal of Hamlet.
Yep.
He meets the ghost for the first time. What about this scene made his wig famous?
Okay, so this is a total stab in the dark, but I seem to remember that old theatres were quite dangerous because they used lime lamps, which were open flames, basically.
Yes.
So my thought is that his wig became famous because he set it, like, it got set on fire. Like, that's my guess.
It's a good guess because theatres were incredibly flammable and most of them burnt down several times.
So many. When we've been researching this episode, so many of them have burnt down several times.
Including today's theatre. We're going to be discussing later.
But I'm guessing from the fact that you said it in that tone of voice that that's not the correct answer.
Not in this case. I'm sure that probably did happen many times. It's even more unlikely. And it's especially unlikely when you learn more about the actor, which we will do later in this episode. It just becomes more hilarious. But Garrick had a professional wig maker create a mechanical wig that had some contraption inside it that made the hair stand on end when Hamlet sees the ghost to simulate a reaction of mortal dread.
That's pretty cool.
And if that sounds a lot more comical than it does dramatic, it seems that even a lot of Garrick's contemporaries felt the same way and reacted with amused bafflement. But apparently, Garrick took the wig quite seriously and thought it could really heighten his expressive effect in the scene.
I'm with Garrick on this one. I think that's awesome. I think that's brilliant. Like, they're still making effects like that today. So yeah, I'm down with it. He was well ahead of his time.
Well, to be fair, he actually was. And I wish I could have seen that wig.
I think I would like to have seen that wig as well. I don't think I can win now, but it is time for our final question to each other. We do have a special listener quiz question coming up in a little bit as well. So, yeah, hit me with your last question, even though I can't possibly win at this point. Not unless this offers multiple bonus points.
Okay. Well, I can probably make it offer bonus points. So, since the 1950s, the Palace Theatre in London has kept 2 of its seats permanently roped off, not allowing any paying member of the public to sit in them, a tradition they only broke in 2016, and then to much controversy. But why?
Oh, I honestly don't know.
Again, I wasn't expecting you to know, but you could probably have a very good guess. Just, intuitively guess.
I'll guess at that one.
Yeah.
I think I've got a quite easy one for you. Okay. So I think you're going to trounce me this year.
I could yet surprise you.
Well, you're already winning. I don't think I can pull it back, and I did offer bonus points on this one as well. So you could really run away with it.
Can offer bonus. I could potentially offer bonus points on the other one.
I'm not holding out much hope, but anyway, I suspect you probably know the answer to this one. But since it's Christmas, I thought I'd be nice and give you an easy question.
Go ahead.
There's also 2 answers.
Oh, okay.
So you'll get double points if you get both.
Interesting.
And I, of course, know that you're well aware of the tradition of burning a Yule log.
Mm-hmm.
But there are a couple of additional parts to the law, as well as just burning the log itself. Do you know what they are?
Oh, that's vague. Say it again. So what are the extra parts of the law of burning a Yule log? Okay.
Yeah.
Right.
I can give you a cute clue if you
No,
like.
no, don't give me a clue because you've already given me lots of clues and that's probably the only reason I'm winning. You can give me a clue if I haven't figured it out by the end of the next story.
Okay, fair enough.
Okay.
It is then time for our next listener story, and this one is from Verity.
We moved to London in my teens so that my mum could be closer to her mother, my granny. Granny had moved into a nursing home. Our new home was less than an hour away, and this meant we'd visit every week for a few hours. During one of our regular visits, Granny's room seemed really busy, as if lots of people had wandered in. I'd never really seen things, but had always felt energies. People, land, you name it, I felt it. As I was trying to play Guess Who with the energies, I recognised one. My grandfather and my granny's husband, whose funeral I attended when I was about 6 weeks old. I knew it was him since he often popped in to visit around Remembrance Day, reminding us all about our poppies. He was a paratrooper during World War II, and the poppy was important to him, in life and, it seemed, in death too. There were easily 8 to 10 different energies in that room from the usual, but one really stood out. What I felt to be a young, well-dressed gentleman. He had a warming air of confidence and comfort. It was actually really nice. I spoke to my mum afterwards and told her what I had experienced, and after giving her the young, well-dressed gentleman description, she knew exactly who I was talking about. Granny's brother, who had died young. I'm not sure how young or when, but I'm pretty sure he'd not reached his 40s, and I had never met him. As you can guess, we took this to mean that the family were gathering, and that Granny's time in this realm was coming to an end. We were prepared for the call. And so we continued our weekly visits, and soon the energies started dissipating. One thing to mention, Granny was a notoriously stubborn woman who had survived at least one world war. I imagine she gave Death a telling off and told him she just wasn't quite ready to leave yet. Our visits carried on for months afterwards, yet her brother's energy never left. Every visit, her brother would be there, this warm, comfortable hug just behind her chair. Never altering, never leaving, just a constant, friendly and loving companion. Until one day, several months after the first gathering, everyone came back in the room. And that was the last time I saw my granny. My mum got the call to say that she'd passed over just a few days later, and I like to think that her brother was the first to greet her.
And thank you to Verity for getting in touch with that story.
And again, we've kind of accidentally ended up with a bit of a theme running through this episode. We've had family ghosts and ancestral spirits and that kind of thing. Just, it seems to have popped up through the episode, which wasn't planned, but is kind of perfect for a Christmas episode.
Well, and the other thing that I found kind of perfect for a Christmas episode was the friendly ghost aspect as well.
Yeah, we've had quite a few friendly ghosts today.
Yeah, I'm from one side you've got family, on the other side you've got that sort of comfort and friendly, and in some cases like joking, like mischievous. But in this case, it very much seemed like it was pure love and comfort.
Yeah, which is beautiful. On the other hand, though, we're probably letting down the tradition of telling chilling ghost stories around the fire at Christmas.
We're breaking the mould of doing something different. We're standing apart from the crowd.
Instead of bringing you chilling ghost stories to raise the hackles on your neck for Christmas Eve, we're bringing you hugs.
Yes.
Ghostly hugs.
I'm trying to remember that review we had now. What was like listening to Lil and Fitz is like having a hot mug of tea, only the tea is made of ghosts.
Something like that, yeah. My absolute favourite.
So we go back now to the cheesy KOFY Christmas quiz, and it's time for the answers to the final questions this year for us.
For us.
We have one more question just for you listeners. I don't think I can win, but come on, hit me with your last question.
Okay, so to quickly recap, my question was, the Palace Theatre in London has kept 2 of its seats permanently roped off since the 1950s.
Mm-hmm.
Why?
So, I mean, it's got to be something about famous people that would sit there, or maybe the person that built the theatre would always sit there. It's got to be irregular, like, you know, like Bill's seat at the pub. It's something like that. As to who it is, I'm not sure.
Oh, well, I didn't ask who, because that would be kind of mean, because to be honest, like, I can't see how you really would ever know that.
Well, and I was thinking the only people that it might be, if it was that sort of thing, was like the King and the Queen, or somebody like so important that you would just have to guess. So I'm guessing it's not actually them. But I'm guessing somebody used to always sit there, they died, and the seats are kept there because if somebody else sits there, there's bad luck or something like that. That's my guess.
So basically your guess is that the seats are reserved for ghosts.
Yeah, basically.
Well, you get a point.
Hooray. Single point.
The seats are said, or were said until they were finally kind of unlocked off, were said to be saved for 2 ghosts who were reputed to enjoy watching performances from the bolted down seats in the balcony. I don't necessarily think that they were theatre regulars. I wasn't able to really dig down and find out the kind of why these 2 particular seats. But basically, one ghost is said to be the spirit of well-known actor, singer and composer Ivan Novello, and the other, the world-famous prima ballerina Anna Pavlova. Apparitions of both of these celebrities have reportedly been witnessed at the palace, and apparently, as far as I could get with the origin story, Ivan Novello's musical The King's Rhapsody was playing at the palace when the actor died in 1951. So as the tradition started in the 1950s, I'm guessing that may have been what kicked off the tradition as a sort of a sign of respect.
Okay. And is anything bad said to happen if the seats are sat?
No, but having said that, when in 2016, when people were allowed to sit in them for the first time, it did, like, there was quite a lot of uproar about it. People didn't like it, which is understandable. I mean,
yeah, and there's
such
a lot
long-standing
of sort of tradition and luck and things that go on in theatres.
People were not very impressed, to be honest.
I can see that being an issue.
Yeah.
So, hooray, I finally got a question right.
You did.
Well, I can't win. It is, at this point, impossible for me to win, but you can trounce me by getting an additional 2 bonus points. So, if you remember, at Christmas time, there is a tradition of burning a Yule log on the fire, but there are a couple of additional parts to the law, rather than just burning the log. A little bit more specific. Can you think of what they are? Do you need a clue?
Well, I think that one of them is saving a piece of the Yule log from last year to light the next year's Yule log.
Yeah, I thought you'd know.
Yeah.
So yeah, that's one.
Another tradition. I'm not sure I'm going to get the second point, to be honest. I'm probably going to kick myself when you tell me.
Would you like to guess, or
is there a clue for that one?
Okay, well, the clue I originally had was that both are things that you need to do once the log's been lit.
Oh. No, I don't know.
Okay, well, I shall give you the answer. It is to not let the fire go out.
Oh, no, I did know that. Oh,
I
honestly.
thought you would. Yeah, it's said to be unlucky to have to relight it.
Yeah.
And obviously, you'd got the part about keeping a part of the Yule log to light the next year's fire.
Yes. Oh, see, I said I'd kick myself.
Yeah. So there's actually quite a bit of contention over the origins and purpose of the Yule log, which I found quite fascinating while I was researching. According to Wikipedia, the first mention of the Yule log, as we know it, was in a poetry collection from 1648, where it was referred to as a Christmas log and was supposed to bring good luck. It was slightly later hypothesized that the tradition may date from an earlier Saxon custom as a representation of the returning sun, but as pretty much all of the records we have date from a time that Christianity was already widespread, and any heathen customs were derisively or dismissively recorded, if at all, it's difficult to say if there was any significant meaning to it. There is, though, some agreement that the size of the log should be somewhat impressive, with stipulations like larger than one man can lift alone having been recorded, and this seems to tie in with some variants of the tradition that require the log to be burned from Christmas Eve through Christmas Day, which is quite impressive for a single log, all the way up to a log that burns for the entire 12 days of Christmas. Now that is one heck of a log. Not only that, but you have to have one hell of a fireplace to burn a log that will last for 12 days. Sadly, the mentions of any superstition or supernatural powers of Yule or Christmas logs only appears from the 17th century, and earlier accounts only really talk about the large fires needed to heat the large halls used for winter festivals. Just because the folklore isn't ancient, though, doesn't mean that it's any less valuable. In Britain, there are a couple of snippets of Yule log folklore from the early 1900s, where it seems already well established. In 1914, a Mrs. Day of Minchinhampton is recorded as recounting, "The Yule log is generally given, and is at once put on the hearth. It's unlucky to have to light it again after it's once been started, and it ought not to go out until it's burned away. To sit around the Yule log and tell ghost stories is a great thing to do on this night."
Oh, awesome.
Also, card playing.
Also card playing.
2 large coloured candles are a Christmas present from the grocery. Just before supper on Christmas Eve, when frumenty is eaten, and incidentally, frumenty is a kind of porridge usually made with cracked wheat, which sounds delicious, while the Yule log is burning. All of the lights are put out, and the candles are lit from the Yule log by the youngest person present. When they're lit, all are silent and wish. It is common practice for the wish to be kept secret. Once the candles are on the table, the silence may be broken. They must be allowed to burn themselves out, and no other lights may be lit that night. Actually made me think about birthday cake candles for a second there.
I was just going to say that.
There is also similar Yule log folklore recorded in Yorkshire in 1923. In the last generation, the Yule log was still burned, and a piece of it saved to light the next year's log. On Christmas morning, something green, a leaf or the like, was brought into the house before anything was taken out. It seems that the whole of the United Kingdom and Ireland share some kind of Yule log tradition. It was commonly called a Yule clog in North East England, the Yule block in the Midlands and West Country, and Goole block in Lincolnshire. In Cornwall, they called it Stock of the Mock. In Wales, it's called Bonsif Nadolig, or Blockin y Gwyliau, which means the Christmas log or the festival block. In Scotland, it's called Yule Carline, the Christmas old wife. And in Ireland, it's called Block na Nullig. And a huge thank you to Emma Thane of Cawdor and Stan on Blue Sky. And apologies, Stan, I asked you for the pronunciation of the Irish word and I can't pronounce your surname. So
Oh, the irony.
the irony of that. So thank you so much, both of you, for helping out with the pronunciations there. But yeah, it's very, very common. It seems like everywhere in the UK and Ireland has a very similar tradition. But it seems it's another one of those that's kind of cropped up. It's quite modern. But yeah.
Well, you say that, and I'll be the first to say that sometimes you're right, these traditions, like we think they're really old, and a lot of that is often to do with Victorian writers who there was this kind of spell where writers wanted to revive ancient traditions, and sometimes they just made them up.
Yeah.
That happened quite a lot. Or sometimes they took something that was quite modern and just said it was ancient because they kind of wanted it to be. But the other side of that is that sometimes, especially in England, we have a lot of traditions, some of which we'll hear about later, like mummers plays, that we don't really know how old they are. And sometimes it gets said that, they didn't crop up until the 14th or the 16th centuries because that's the first written record we have of them. But that doesn't actually mean they're not a lot older. It just means that they weren't written down. And sometimes it's like they weren't written down because everybody knew what they were. And there just wasn't really a need to write them down. In the 12th century, people weren't going necessarily, well, some monks were, but, most people weren't going around sort of recording traditions. So a lot of the times we just don't really know.
No, and in this case, we do have earlier writings and they don't seem to have any, like they talk about the other things that go on at the winter celebrations. And the only time they really mention it is to say there's big logs because it's a big fire, because it burns for a long time, because we're having a big party.
Oh, I must admit, I genuinely did think that Yule logs were either an Old Norse or a Saxon tradition. So
it is possible, but it doesn't seem like we've got much to back it up.
No, I've learnt something new today, but that doesn't make it any less cool.
No, and bear in mind that I did just do a cursory skim for a Christmas quiz question. So if anyone's out there going, actually, I think you'll find that in the annals of blah, blah, blah.
Well, if that is the case, then please do get in touch and let us know. We would love to know.
Yeah.
If anybody has already done a deep dive on this research or is like an expert on the history of Yule logs, please come and talk to us.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I was joking when I said... But yeah, if you do have other information, definitely we would love to hear it. Just, make sure it's in there. Oh, you might be really interested to find this rather than actually.
Well,
I still will respond to actuallys if it's interesting information.
I was going to say.
So that is the Christmas quiz for us this year. You well and truly trounced me this time.
But we do have one more question, and it's only for you listeners. And the reason it's only for you listeners is because originally this was going to be a quiz question that Fitz asked me, only he accidentally sent it to me in a Facebook message.
Yeah.
So he's already told me the answer.
Yeah, well, you see, I have this thing where if I'm doing something and I'm busy and I want to save like a web link or something for myself later, I will messenger myself.
I do it too. There's nothing wrong with that.
And sometimes when we're doing it, we message each other. I'll get some weird link in Facebook Messenger and they'll be like, I'm just saving this for later, just ignore it. And
Absolutely.
I do the same thing. So I automatically just did exactly the same thing. And later when I looked at Facebook and I was going to, right, I'll start doing this question, I looked and there was a reaction on it. And I was like, oh no, I sent it to Lil. So I wasted a perfectly good quiz question.
And I was determined that it would not be wasted because it is actually very interesting. Although, to be fair, I've already forgotten the answer, so you probably could have got away with asking me it. But we thought that we would save it for you. We have one more little story left. So we're going to ask you this listener-only quiz question before we get into that and give you a little time to ruminate before we share the answer.
So, dear listeners, in German folklore, there is told a story of a nun named Ursula, whose singing voice was so terrible that the other nuns would ridicule her for it. However, after her passing, her discordant song could still be heard at morning matins, and the remaining nuns refused to re-enter the church until her spirit was removed. My question to you is, what did they do to banish the spirit of Ursula from the church? I'm waiting for you to say, oh, that's an interesting question. I don't know. And of course,
that's
we
not going to happen.
Hear you. It does often feel like we're having a conversation with you listeners, by the way.
It does.
But we hope that you'll have a few moments to mull over your options. Don't cheat and Google it.
No, that's cheating.
Play fair. And I'm interested to know how you did on the rest of the quiz as well.
Yeah, let us know. Get in touch. Tell us your scores.
But we'll give you a few moments to ruminate, and whilst you're doing that, we've got a couple of little interesting tidbits for you. And the first is from Mateo Oxley, who I spoke to briefly on Blue Sky recently whilst I was looking for interesting paranormal theatre stories, and they said that they had performed in quite a few theatres that were said to be haunted over the years, and the first one that sprang to mind was the Theatre Royal, Stratford East. They described it as a beautiful old late 19th century theatre, full of traditional red and gold colours, and that it felt very charged, especially backstage. They even confirmed that with a staff member when they mentioned it to them. They had several experiences there, including the strong waft of perfume in the scene dock where they'd practiced their lines. They heard footsteps in the empty corridor upstairs near their dressing room, and they felt like they were being watched when they were sitting in the auditorium. They did say that they're fairly sensitive to these things, and it actually inspired them to start writing. And I also got an interesting nugget of information from some bloke in a hat, which is his name on Blue Sky, by the way. I wasn't just calling him some random person on the street. And they got in touch to say that the Grand Theatre in Blackpool is said to be haunted. Up in the gods, people have experienced a chill of cold air and a sense of something walking past them. It's said to be a stagehand that had had an accident, although there are little details to go on. He went on a backstage tour, and since nobody had mentioned the ghost on the tour, he thought he'd ask the guide. They went on to explain that the ventilation system up there can suddenly vent gusts of cold air into the upper levels, hence the cold and the draft. And they were pretty convinced that that was the explanation for the haunting. So, ghost or ventilation? That's probably not the first time that's ever been questioned.
Well, I don't know. I don't see any reason why it can't be both. Like, I think there's definitely, room for a bit of skeptic hat going on in there.
Oh, definitely, yeah.
But that doesn't mean it's not haunted. I mean, every theatre in
does
the
seem
UK
like every theatre
practically
is haunted.
Let's just, if you throw a rock at 10 theatres, you're going to hit a haunted one.
Yeah, it's probably going to pass through about 30 ghosts on the way to the theatre.
On the way to the haunted theatre.
But if we ever get the chance to check out the Grand Theatre in Blackpool, we will go and see if we can have a look for ourselves.
Yes, that would be very cool.
So, speaking of haunted theatres, before we get to that point, we need to see if you guessed the answer to the question, or more correctly, whether or not you knew the answer to the question.
Yes.
Do you know this one?
No, I told you. It's like I said, I genuinely have. Even though I read that message, I read the answer that you sent me and I reacted to it, I immediately forgot because my brain was just full of doing braille things because I was at work.
Okay, so if you remember, the question was effectively there was a nun in Germany called Ursula whose singing was terrible, and the other nuns used to call her names.
It's sounding a bit like Rudolph.
Yes. And she passed away, and after her death, the sound of her terrible singing scared the other nuns.
Oh, that's so sad.
And they banished her from the church. But how did they do it? Well, they turned her into an owl.
Oh, yeah, that's right. That is ringing a bell now.
Is the legend of Tut Ursel, or Tooting Ursula. And the frightened nuns suffered through 4 days of terrible tooting before calling in a Capuchin friar, who was known as a capable exorcist. The friar fasted and prayed, and was eventually able to banish the shade of Tooting Ursula in the form of a screech owl. The story does have a happy ending, though, for Ursula did not enjoy being cooped up in the church, and when banished to the forests of Dumburg, she encountered the wild huntsman Hacklenberg, who was possibly the inspiration for the legends of Headless Horseman, and may deserve a special feature all of his own. Ursula and Hacklenberg recognised in each other a kindred spirit, and rejoiced as they hunted together, their haunting hunting calls crying out in unison ever after.
That's interesting. So do you think, is this like an origin story to explain the fearsome call of the screech owl? As much as a piece of folklore?
I don't know.
Because honestly, owls have... I love owls. They're so beautiful, but their calls, some of them are utterly
quite
terrifying.
Some of them are pretty cute.
I mean, barn owls look so adorable, but oh my goodness, if you heard one on a dark night, you would literally think a banshee was coming down the road.
Yeah, they can be pretty terrifying. And obviously, I can't remember what a screech owl sounds like,
No,
but
I can't.
The name implies that it's not a...
It's quite scary.
It's like...
Which is pretty much what a barn owl sounds like.
Yeah, so I don't know, because this is translated from an earlier story, and I don't know whether they were already called a screech owl or whether this is one of these things that was done later, but I'd be interested to find out, actually.
Yeah.
I think it's possibly a bit more modern, because if I remember correctly, like Hacklenberg was master of a hunt at an estate, so it's got to be fairly recent.
Okay, yeah. So, dear listeners, how did you do on this year's slightly cheesy Christmas quiz? Did you get any points? Did anybody get all of the points? Let us know. We would love to hear from you. But that is the end of the Christmas quiz this year. And that is the end of our listener stories for this episode. Thank you so much to everyone who shared their stories with us today. It is genuinely always an honour to be trusted with the retelling of your stories. And as always, if you have an experience to share, especially now that our website is actually working again, please do get in touch with us at knockoncevs.com. And although that may be the end of the quiz questions, we do, in fact, have another little game for you to play to keep the festive mood going through the main segment if you so desire. New for this year's Christmas special, we have Pretentious Word Bingo. Yes, we all know that I enjoy channeling the spirits of grandiloquent 19th century writers and their florid prose. But when I read back through the script, even I was taken aback at some of the hilariously pretentious words that made it into this episode. Not all of them were mine, I hasten to add. So if you want to play along with Pretentious Word Bingo, all you need to do is jot down the list of words to find in the script on a bit of paper and follow along, marking off each word as you notice it, and of course, yelling house very dramatically if you manage to spot them all. If you've got a bingo marker, bonus points. There are 6 words to look out for, making it nice and easy to divide your page up into a nice neat grid. So, if you have a pen and pencil, and this is starting to feel like an episode of Blue Peter.
Pen and pencil?
And a pencil, a pen and a pen, no, a paper.
Pen and paper.
Pen and paper, oh dear. If everybody's ready, the words are as follows. Transmogrification. Peregrination. Bombastic. Attitudinizing, diaphanous, and comportment. Fitz will now read the list for you one more time, for anybody who didn't catch it.
The first word is transmogrification. The second word is peregrination.
It feels like an 80s quiz show. This is so funny.
The third word is bombastic.
I love that, such a good word.
It is. The fourth word is attitudinizing. The fifth word is diaphanous. And the sixth word is comportment.
And of course, for any adults in the room, if you did desire, there is the potential to turn this into a Christmas drinking game if you happen to already have the Baileys out. And if you do, have one for me. Always drink responsibly.
However you play this new game, it is definitely safer than Snapdragon. And if you find that you'd like it, let us know, and it may well become a new KOFY Christmas special tradition going forwards.
Because it's not Christmas without a few silly games, but not ones where you light things on fire.
Just in case anyone needs to hear it again, do not play Snapdragon.
Do not play.
Do not play.
We forbid you.
But now, we're off to the theatre in search of ghosts and the Christmas butterfly.
Growing up, an outing to see a stage production was part of my Christmas experience from an early age, although the range and quality of these performances varied wildly. Sometimes this took the form of a local Amdram group's Christmas show in the village hall, with missed lines, self-conscious giggles, wardrobe malfunctions, and innuendo running wild. In my older youth, a trip to the ballet to watch a performance of the Nutcracker was an occasion to dust off best frocks and visit the big theatre, marvelling at the sumptuous interior with its scarlet and gold walls, velvet drapes and glittering chandelier, as much as at the dancers, performing leaps that seemed to defy gravity, their weightless, elfin appearance at odds with the painful-sounding thumps that reverberated through the theatre each time their slippered feet were reacquainted with the stage, raising clouds of dust with every impact. And less glamorous, but maybe the most seasonal of all, the pantomimes. fairy tales brought to life with much gusto and off-key singing, equal parts dad jokes, wigs and hammy acting. The drunk-looking panto horse with its rear end always in danger of taking an untimely tumble, and of course, the perennial refrains of "He's behind you" and "Oh no, he didn't."
Oh, yes, he did.
So when we heard a story about supernatural goings-on at a theatre in Bath during their festive pantomime season, as well as hosting a whole cast of other resident spirits, it seemed like the perfect subject for a Christmas Hauntings episode. We happened across the tale whilst watching a BBC documentary from the 1970s called The Ghost Hunters. In the programme, a rather sceptical interviewer travels around the UK seeking out paranormal investigators of the time to interview them and get a glimpse into their lives working with the otherworld. Some of the names you might recognise, such as authors Andrew Green and Peter Underwood, but most you probably won't. And it was one of the investigators we had never heard of before that brought us this fascinating tale, when the programme introduced us to Mrs. Royal, self-proclaimed ghost collector, and her husband, as we watched them gallantly field a series of ever more cutting and incredulous questions from the obviously disbelieving interviewer, before taking us on a haunted walking tour of their home city of Bath, whose streets, it seems, are crammed with a whole host of spirits. But it was the final stop of the tour that piqued our interest, as the gaggle of ghost enthusiasts in Mrs. Royal's care entered Bath's Theatre Royal and gathered on a stage set dressed as a chintzy living room, and not, it must be said, looking in the slightest bit spooky, to be told the strange tale of the Theatre Royal pantomime's Christmas Butterfly.
Pantomimes being performed at Christmas has been a tradition all around the UK since at least the 18th century, but it may well lean into even older traditions dating back centuries before that. Pantomime itself is widely understood to be a direct descendant of Renaissance Italy's commedia dell'arte, a form of improvised comedy play that used stock characters and drew on traditional storylines, but whose actors continually adapted performances to reflect contemporary events and ideas, and used them to provide social commentary as well as entertainment, through slapstick, satire and dance. These 16th and 17th century plays were performed across Europe, eventually coming to England and planting the seed of what would become pantomime as we know it today. But they were not performed exclusively at Christmas. Here in the UK, though, we already had traditions of festive performances involving costumes, comedy and lampooning, one of which was the Tudor Christmas-time tradition of the Feast of Fools, a raucous Christmas party in which a Lord of Misrule was appointed to direct over the festive revelries in a court, household or even a whole village. For wealthy households and royal courts particularly, it was an opportunity to show off and let loose, so the more extravagant and slightly ridiculous the revelries, the better, amongst which might include plays, feasts, processions, masks, elaborate and comical costumes, and, no doubt, a whole lot of drinking. Despite the name, however, the Lord of Misrule was traditionally someone of lower class and rank, who got to, excuse the pun, lord it over their respective household, court or village for the 12 days of Christmas. Part of the tradition being that of role reversal, with the usual social order upended. Masters waiting on their servants, a mock court, jesters and all concerned poking fun at each other, including the lower classes being allowed, for this brief spell, to mock the pomp and comportment of the upper echelons of society. The role-swapping, costumes, performance and satire all becoming very much part of modern-day pantomimes. Another possible influence is that of the even older Mummers plays, which involved groups of locals performing house to house, in pubs and on the street at various seasonal events, but especially at Christmas. Performances employed costumes, masks or face paint, props, and sometimes even sword dances to tell tales of heroic battles as well as romance, but generally all with a comedic tone, typically with one character dying mid-tale only to be brought back to life by a doctor wielding a magic potion. Other regular characters include St. George, Old Oss, and even Father Christmas. However these older influences may have fed into the blossoming of English pantomime though, the man who really cemented the UK tradition of a Christmas panto season was celebrated 18th century actor and manager of the Theatre Royal on London's Drury Lane, David Garrick, who, rather ironically, hated pantomimes. Garrick became famous for his realistic method of acting, which was at odds with the typical style of the time, that style having been described variously as bombastic, stately attitudinizing, pompous recitative. The naturalistic acting Garrick brought to the stage caused waves through the entire theatre world, of disdain from some fellow actors, but largely of appreciation and approval from audiences. Garrick's work set the tone for the acting styles we're probably most familiar with today, and yet, in 1759, he wrote a pantomime that premiered at Drury Lane on New Year's Eve, called Harlequin's Invasion. Like most pantomimes of the time in England, the play centres on the character of Harlequin, a nimble, astute and mischievous stock character inherited from commedia dell'arte, who never spoke and was characterised by their checkered costume. Garrick shocked audiences by ripping up the rulebook and giving Harlequin dialogue for the first time. As an unrelated but interesting aside, this show also spawned the song Heart of Oak, which would become the official march of the Royal Navy. It might seem odd for someone who so obviously disdained overblown acting styles to write a pantomime, which did, and still does, employ some of the most over-the-top acting you can imagine. However, he was not only an actor, but a theatre manager, and a canny one at that, who never missed a commercial opportunity. He is reported to have declared, "If they won't come to Lear or Hamlet, I must give them Harlequin." But he was determined that the grotesque performances, as he called them, wouldn't compete for the stage with his beloved Shakespeare. So he limited pantomimes at Drury Lane strictly to the festive season only, feeling the performances were best suited to the revelry of Christmas celebrations. With this at least, theatres around the country agreed, and the Christmas panto season would become another of Garrick's legacies that still persist today. It was ironic that looking into the history of panto brought us swiftly and undeniably to the famed actor David Garrick, because, although we didn't know it when we started this research journey, his ghost would be the first we would meet this episode. This was rather unexpected. After all, with all the years of work and passion that David Garrick poured into Drury Lane, you could be forgiven for thinking that if the 18th century actor would choose anywhere to make a ghostly visitation from beyond the grave, then he would choose his beloved London theatre. But although Drury Lane has ghosts aplenty, probably enough to fill a whole other episode in fact, Garrick's spectre is actually reported to have been witnessed over 100 miles away, in a building that's part of a different theatre entirely, the Theatre Royal, Bath.
Nestled in a crook of a loop of the River Avon as it meanders through the city of Bath, is a warren of ancient streets simply jam-packed with history, heritage, and, of course, ghosts. Here, the unparalleled ruins of the famous Roman bathhouse that gave the city its name stand in pleasing harmony with the 18th century architecture constructed when Bath catapulted to fame as the fashionable leisure resort of the Regency era. And right in the middle of a veritable treasure trove of historic gems, between the medieval abbey, a thermal spa, circus, assembly rooms and Royal Crescent, sits a Georgian theatre. Built from the same warm honey-coloured limestone known as Bathstone as so many of its neighbouring buildings, the theatre on Saw Close is impressive enough. The 3-storey stepped facade rising up like the tiers of a wedding cake, rows of sash windows and balustraded balconies gracing the first and second floors, whilst on the ground, 3 columned archways with gilded mouldings form the entryway, above which a stone coat of arms announces that we have arrived at the new Theatre Royal. It may seem odd to call a building dating from 1805 new, but this theatre actually replaced the original Bath Theatre Royal that stood in a different location and operated from 1750, receiving its royal patent in 1757, and finally closing in 1805 when the theatre company moved to its new location on Saw Close. When the new theatre first opened, however, the entrance was on the north side of the building, only being moved to its present location after a fire gutted the interior in 1862. The original frontage is perhaps more picturesque, and fans of the hit Netflix series Bridgerton may already be unwittingly familiar with it. On Bath's Beaufort Square, the Theatre Royal spans the whole width of a rectangle that's completed by Georgian terraced houses on all sides. A neat green lawn sits at the centre, surrounded by original 19th century wrought iron railings and softly lit gas-style street lamps. The face of the theatre is decorated with a frieze of garlands and masks depicting the comic and tragic muses. The edge of the roof is crowned by a central carving of the Hanoverian coat of arms, flanked by carved stone lyres topping each pilaster. On a day when the street is empty of modern vehicles, there are few signs of 20th century life on this tucked-away little square, and it would be incredibly easy to imagine horse-drawn carriages rattling down the street and ladies in bustled skirts sweeping across the lawn. So it's no wonder that the period drama Bridgerton filmed many of its scenes on this very square, and in fact, at various locations around the still cobbled streets of Bath. Moving to the south side of the building, we find yet another entrance to the theatre, but it wasn't always so. In fact, this entrance isn't quite part of the Theatre Royal after all. The square, late Baroque building appearing to have been partially swallowed up by the sprawling theatre. But it is here that we begin our journey into Bath's hauntings, and if we look high above the doorway, we'll see a stone bust of a man wearing a double-collared coat and a wig with 2 neat side curls looking out across the streets of Bath. The bust is of actor David Garrick, and this building that has long been incorporated into the Theatre Royal is a pub called Garrick's Head. The pub was originally built as a large and grand house in 1720 and didn't become part of the theatre until much later. But it is reported that for many years there have been corridors linking the theatre and Garrick's Head. The popular story goes that David Garrick was at one time a resident, or at least a guest of the 1720 house, and to save him going out into the street to reach the theatre, he had a wall knocked through from one building to the other to grant him easier access. And it's here, in an adjoining corridor, that the apparition of a man wearing Regency-style dress and wig is seen in the shadows. Of course, given the name of the pub and the actor's bust peering down from the front door, you can understand why people have long thought this phantom to be the returning shade of the great actor himself. However, there are a few problems with this story, the biggest being that the new Theatre Royal wasn't even built until 6 years after Garrick's death. The second being that, technically speaking, Garrick wasn't a gentleman of the Regency either, that particular period only spanning the years between 1811 to 1820. But, as it's quite common to use the term Regency to refer to a broader stretch of the Georgian period, it's understandable that witnesses might mistake the dress style of the two periods. And unless you have a very expert eye indeed, the menswear and, maybe most importantly, the wigs of Garrick's lifespan between 1717 and 1779 wouldn't have looked terribly different to that of the Regency. So, could this bewigged spectre hanging around the 1720 house be that of David Garrick after all, despite the theatre only being built after his death? Well, maybe. There are a scant handful of mentions of Garrick at least visiting Bath, even a tantalising hint that he may have performed there, presumably at the original Theatre Royal, but I couldn't find anything concrete with the resources available to me. What we do know for sure, though, is that Garrick was certainly in Bath when an artist named Robert Edge Pine, who was living in the city, asked Garrick to sit for a portrait. The resulting painting was declared by Garrick's wife to be the most faithful likeness of her husband of all his portraits. So much so that after Garrick's death, once a year she asked the owners of the painting to be allowed to sit with it for a while in tender remembrance of her husband she missed so dearly. In the painting, he's wearing the classic powdered wig, just like his bust above the Garrick's Head pub. But would he have visited the 1720s house? Well, apparently, Garrick was rather well known for his love of staying with his well-to-do friends at their grand houses, and in the mid-18th century, the 1720s house was thought to be very grand indeed. In fact, it was nicknamed the Palace, and its original owner became popularly known as the King of Bath.
It's often said that there are two things that made Bath famous. Firstly, of course, the hot mineral springs that led the Romans to establish a thermal spa there in the 1st century AD, and a man called Richard Nash. When Nash arrived in Bath in 1704, the rejuvenation of the city had already begun, under the direction of Queen Anne and King George. But Nash had a vision that would make waves, change fashions, and even social etiquette. Before long, Richard had garnered the nickname Beau Nash due to his daring fashion choices and foppish ways. He famously eschewed the traditional white wig for a black one, paired with rakishly angled cream beaver-trimmed hat. He wore his coat open to show off his fancy waistcoat and ruffled shirt ensemble, and preferred shoes and stockings to the more widely worn boots, a fashion which he managed to successfully spread to locals and visitors alike. These may not sound like the most shocking fashion deviations to us today, but back in the Georgian era, it certainly raised some eyebrows, and Nash quickly became known as the most fashionable man outside of London. But that wasn't enough for the black-wigged dandy. He wanted the whole city to become the most fashionable outside of London, appointing himself to the unofficial role of Master of Ceremonies, and embarking on a campaign of social events and etiquette reforms that would elevate Bath to become a top leisure destination of 18th century England. He directed the entire social scene of the city, from balls, music, card games, and contracting the building of Bath's assembly rooms, another real location woven into the fictional Bridgerton TV series, to establish a new code of conduct for respectability, banning swearing in public and relaxing the rules of social integration between different classes, which actually did a lot to break down class barriers at a time when such a thing was pretty unheard of. Nash is reported to have been a generous and benevolent person, frequently raising money for charitable causes, protecting gamblers against card sharps, and even extracting gentlemen from card games before they lost their fortunes when their bravado or their alcohol consumption was getting the better of them. But despite all this, and everything he'd done to raise the city of Bath to such heights of fame, he made most of his income from gambling. And when gambling laws changed in 1739 and Nash's primary income stream was cut off, he fell from favour and eventually lost everything, including the house that would eventually become the Garrick's Head pub and part of the Theatre Royal. He was taken in by his mistress, Juliana Popjoy, who, happily for him, lived in a house almost next door. Today it still stands on Saw Close, just the other side of Theatre Royal. The three locations, the so-called palace, the theatre and Juliana's house, quite literally joined at the hip. So maybe it's no surprise that one of Bath's most famous apparitions, a classic grey lady ghost, is known to haunt all three locations. Today, Juliana Popjoy's house, and the home of Beau Nash after his fall from grace, is an Italian restaurant. A plaque dedicated to the couple is installed in one of the two walled-up windows in the Georgian Bathstone house's frontage, the window presumably having been long ago sacrificed in the name of the much-hated window tax of the 17th, 18th and 19th centuries. According to author Nick Bromley, it was also a restaurant back in the 1970s, fittingly called Popjoy's, and, one night, an unsuspecting diner there had quite a spectacular run-in with what may just have been Juliana's ghost. The unsuspecting gentleman was staying in a nearby hotel and had booked a table at Popjoy's for his dinner. Having been directed upstairs for an aperitif until his table was ready, the gentleman relaxed with his drink, not thinking much of it, when he noticed a lady on the far side of the otherwise empty room. He politely smiled and nodded at what he assumed to be a fellow diner, but the woman, clad in an evening dress and jewellery, glared poisonously at him, as though he had invaded her private space and committed an unforgivable social faux pas. Slightly unnerved and not sure what to make of her uncalled-for reaction, the man turned back to his aperitif. But before he even had time to take a sip to settle his unease, the woman was inexplicably right beside him. How, he couldn't say. It had happened in barely the blink of an eye. No human being could possibly move that fast. Yet, there she was, eyes coldly boring into him, and the ordeal was about to get worse. Before his now terrified gaze, the visage of the impeccably dressed woman morphed and warped as it transitioned into the shape of a hideous old hag clothed in filthy, tattered rags. Downstairs, the unwitting restaurant staff, calmly making their dinner preparations, heard a spine-chilling scream, followed by the thunderous stampede of the gentleman's horrified exit down the stairs, flying through the dining hall in a frantic blur, spilling out into the street and away into the night without so much as a word to the staff about what had happened. Then how do they know what he saw, I hear you ask? Well, the restaurant owners were so confused and concerned by what had happened that they phoned the hotel the gentleman had been staying at to check he was all right. In the hotel, at least, he had paused long enough to relate his terrifying experience before checking out the hotel and leaving immediately. Apparently, he felt strongly enough about his strange encounter to want to leave the city entirely, and he is reported to have claimed that he would never return. This gentleman is not the only person to have seen a phantom lady in the restaurant, though, with at least one manager reporting that staff had also witnessed the apparition of a woman in an old dress in the upstairs rooms. So, could this be the ghost of former owner Juliana Popjoy? Well, some seem to think so, based, in part, on a fascinating record from an annual register of 1777, recording the death of Juliana Popjoy in her native town of Bishopstow. Juliana seems to have caused quite a stir in her younger years, garnering the nickname Betty Besom on account of a riding crop she carried that had so many tails it resembled a broom or besom, and wore a wig that similarly brought to mind a stiff brush. A cartoon published in 1777 depicts her broom-wielding figure astride a horse, both horse and rider in the act of leaping over a fence labelled the sacred boundary of discretion, a pile of unpaid bills fluttering in her wake. The record from the annual register reveals that she continued to be a controversial and curious figure in her later years too. It read thus: Juliana Popjoy, in her youth, had been the mistress of the famous Nash of Bath, and after her separation from him, she took to a very uncommon way of life. Her principal residence she took up in a large hollow tree on a lock of straw, resolving never more to lie in a bed. And she was as good as her word, for she made that tree her habitation for between 30 and 40 years, unless she made her short peregrinations to Bath, Bristol, and the gentlemen's houses adjacent, and she then lay in some barn or outhouse. It seems that Juliana had, after parting ways with Nash, become slightly feral, living like a hermit and refusing to engage in indoors life ever again, even when she was visiting friends in the city. Was this drastic change from life on the arm of the 18th century's most famous dandy to that of a hermit, represented in the terrifying transmogrification from evening-dressed lady to rag-clad hag that the diner witnessed?
Although we can never say for sure who the phantom lady haunting Juliana Popjoy's house may be, it does seem to make a lot of sense that it might be the former owner. Many consider that the ghost haunting Popjoy's, the Garrick's Head and the Theatre Royal to be one and the same, due to the grey lady type description so often reported. But I am not so sure, particularly in the case of the Garrick's Head pub. A grey lady's presence has definitely been reported there, but the pub has also been the backdrop for a variety of other strange activity, as one of author Nick Bromley's colleagues found out during their stay at the pub whilst working on a show at the new Theatre Royal in the 1970s. The whole stage crew had apparently heard stories that the Garrick's Head was reputed to have a haunted back bedroom before their arrival there. As a result, some of them had wisely requested one of the front rooms of the establishment, hoping to avoid the resident ghost. But one of their number was much more cavalier about the claims, pooh-poohing them as superstitious rubbish, eagerly taking the largest room and caring nothing that the location was quite likely that of the haunted bedroom. As you have probably guessed, it was a decision they would come to regret. The sceptical lady spent an uneasy night in the large back room, half convinced that someone was in there with her, waking frequently to a feeling that she was not alone. She wrote it off as the power of suggestion, probably annoyed that the group's belief in the ghost of the Garrick's Head had got under her skin and was now costing her sleep. But it wasn't so easy to brush aside what happened next. Having finally fallen back asleep after another fitful start of frustratedly waking to a room full of nothing but darkness and silence, she was about to be stirred once more, as the bed covers began to move, pulled by an unseen hand. A shock of movement and then cold startled her awake as the covers were whipped off the bed by an invisible force. At this point, she could no longer deny that something very strange was in fact going on at the Garrick's Head after all, and she wanted no part of it. In the morning, looking drawn and haggard to the surprise of her colleagues, She asked the landlady if she could change rooms. Without missing a beat, let alone asking why, the landlady wearily agreed. She was not the first guest asking to be moved out of that room, and certainly wouldn't be the last. Other guests who have stayed at the pub have reported equally disturbed nights, being awoken by a knocking at their door in the small hours, only to find no one in sight. Door handles are turned and rattled by unseen hands, disembodied footsteps stalk the hallways, and some have even reported hearing an unexplained, sinister laugh. These days, the Garrick's Head no longer rents out rooms to guests, so presumably the resident spirit can no longer be causing sleepless nights, but they appear to have plenty of other tricks up their sleeves, some of them distinctly poltergeisty in nature. Wall cupboards have been seen to shake violently for no apparent reason, and items such as cash and bunches of keys mysteriously vanish, only to reappear days later in different rooms, oftentimes locked rooms that no one has been in. Patrons have witnessed candles move of their own accord, and in the 1990s, a heavy, old-fashioned cash register somehow moved itself from the bar and was flung across the room with such force that the impact smashed a chair to pieces. Maybe most sinister of all is the large pool of blood that was known to appear on the pub floor at the same time each year, although I couldn't find any documentary evidence of this, so presumably this is one manifestation that ceased before cameras were commonly accessible. Can the Grey Lady ghost really be responsible for all this strange activity? Well, maybe not. But next door in the Theatre Royal, there have also been reports of things being moved by an unseen hand, so maybe more spirits than just the Grey Lady flit back and forth between buildings.
Nick Bromley reports in his 2021 book Stage Ghosts and Haunted Theatres that actress Louise Ford had her own strange experience of inexplicably moving objects quite recently during a 2008 performance of War and Peace at the Bath Theatre Royal. Resting in her dressing room that was locked from the inside, she was disturbed when something flew at her from out of nowhere, and a metal coat hanger hit her resting form on the bed. Looking across the room, she could see that the other hangers on the rail were jostling and swinging wildly. There were no open windows to admit any breeze, and nobody else in the locked room with her. I can only wonder if this supernatural experience stayed with the actress, as, coincidentally or not, she went on to star in Danny Robbins' stage show 222, A Ghost Story. But odd occurrences such as this have been happening for years at the theatre, with one notable event concerning a prop clock taking place in 1963. The clock was on stage for set dressing, but it wasn't a working machine, and no wonder. I can imagine how irritating it would be to have an old-fashioned clock ticking away loudly on stage, or chiming at inopportune moments. As such, all its internal mechanisms had been removed. But somehow, this didn't stop it chiming. It said that, at an appropriate moment in the play that was being performed, the stage lights mysteriously dimmed, and the empty clock chimed loudly 3 times. Sadly, I couldn't discover what was being performed, why it was an appropriate moment in the play, or what the chiming might have signified, but nobody could ever get to the bottom of how a clock with no workings could have possibly chimed by itself. I must admit that these somewhat mischievous actions don't really sound like the repertoire of a classic Grey Lady ghost, but the Theatre Royal does have another resident spectre in its repertoire. This apparition is reported to only appear to thespians, and as far as I can find, has never been witnessed by members of the audience. When he is seen, it is usually not in the theatre itself, but in the front of house areas, including the corridors, bars and foyer. And he seems to hail from the theatre's early days, being described as wearing a velvet coat, red wig and tricorn hat, with knee breeches, stockings and buckled shoes. Whoever he is, I can't help but feel that Beau Nash would approve of the chap's fashion sense. We still may not have found our culprit for thrown coat hangers and mysteriously chiming clocks though, and we perhaps never will, as this phantom's appearance is not reported to coincide with any poltergeist-type activity, and many people have surmised that the dapper spirit is merely seeking company, frequenting, as he does, the most lively and populated areas of the building. Maybe the vibrant energy of hundreds of people enjoying themselves at the theatre every night is just an enjoyable place for a lonely ghost out of time to hang out. But what of the Grey Lady? Well, her favoured spots do seem to be in the theatre itself.
Of course, due to the fire that gutted the Theatre Royal in 1862, nothing remains of the original interior, with further alterations taking place during extensive renovations and refurbishments in 1902, again in the 1980s, and most recently in 2010. I wasn't able to find any easily accessible plans of the original layout, so I don't know how different it may have been to the auditorium we see today, with its proscenium arch, 4-tiered horseshoe-shaped stalls, lush scarlet furnishings, and walls with accents of white and gold under an ornately decorated domed ceiling and crowning chandelier. But if it has changed at all, the alterations either haven't been enough to put the Grey Lady off her favourite spots, or she has adapted to find new ones. And for many years, she has been spotted occupying her favourite haunts, occasionally in the corridor of the dress circle, but most often in the upper circle box to the left of the stage, where actors and guests alike have seen her both materialise and vanish, including some notable names such as actors Lisa Goddard and Christopher Timothy, who both reportedly witnessed the apparition in 1991 during a performance of the production Moment of Weakness. I came across one interesting theory that posited the idea that as she is seen on the left side of the theatre, the side that has been merged with Beau Nash's old house, now the Garrick's Head pub, maybe the apparition's favourite box was once her favourite room or even her bedroom in the 1720s house before the two buildings were incorporated. It's an interesting thought, especially as she is reported to flit between the theatre and the pub, although she has been witnessed in other parts of the theatre too, as we will hear shortly. Witnesses who have seen Bath's famous Grey Lady have all reported remarkably similar descriptions. She is said to be wearing a grey gown of 18th century style, long white gloves, and either some type of feathered headdress or to have grey feathers in her hair. And in classic Grey Lady style, she is somewhat faded and ethereal in appearance. Those who have felt her presence say that she carries with her a melancholy air and is sometimes accompanied by a sudden, icy drop in temperature. But her most easily recognisable feature is that everywhere she's seen and felt, whether in the theatre or the pub, the sweet scent of jasmine follows in her wake. But who is she?
Since we started this research, it's become apparent that a huge number of theatres around the UK boast Grey Lady ghosts, and there seems to be a stock origin story that accompanies most of them, Bath's Grey Lady being no exception. That legend tells of a woman who fell hopelessly in love with one of the theatre's actors, and, finding her love unrequited, couldn't stand the thought of a future without her beloved, and sadly took her own life. In Bath, we have a couple of variations on this legend. One is that the lady in question was having an affair that was discovered by her husband, who challenged her lover to a good old-fashioned duel, pistols at dawn and all that. Unluckily for her and her lover, Her husband turned out to be the better shot, and his wife, stricken with grief, leapt out of a high window of the Garrick's Head to meet her doom. Yet another version of the tale goes along the same lines, but has husband and lover meeting at one of Beau Nash's famous card tables. The story progresses to a similarly tragic end. Legends like these seem to pop up all around the country, but author Betty Puttock, in her 2002 book Supernatural England, may just have discovered where one version of this story comes from, at least in regards to Bath's Grey Lady ghost. The author doesn't specify a year, but relates that preceding a run of Noel Coward's Blithe Spirits at Bath's Theatre Royal, a publicity stunt may have conjured more than the marketing team bargained for. The play Blithe Spirits centres around a séance, conducted by an earnest medium, but hosted by a small, sceptically amused group who expect nothing more than an evening of entertainment and frivolity. They all get more than they bargained for when the waspish spirit of the host's deceased wife is conjured by the séance and proceeds to wreak havoc in her husband's life. To drum up enthusiasm for the play's run, the Theatre Royal decided to hold a mock séance on stage, a little taster of the play's content, if you will. But, just like in the play, the hosts got more than they bargained for when a real spirit seemed to come through. The stage medium reportedly receiving messages from an actress who had once starred at the theatre, had fallen in love with an actor who was killed in a duel, and subsequently took her own life. According to Betty Puttock, listeners actually heard sounds of weeping as the séance was taking place. Could this be the Grey Lady's real origin story? Or was the medium simply picking up on decades, maybe even hundreds of years, of the story being told over and over again within the walls of the theatre? Or maybe the publicity stunt was a kind of double bluff. We may never know. But that wasn't the last or the most shocking appearance of the Grey Lady of Bath's Theatre Royal. No, that accolade goes to a manifestation in 1975, when the theatre was showing a production called The Dame of Sark, starring Dame Anna Neagle, and the entire cast and several members of the audience are said to have witnessed her. The jaw-dropping appearance is mentioned in several sources, but we turn again to Nick Bromley's Stage Ghosts and Haunted Theatres for the most complete report that we've been able to find. It seems that the first witnesses to spot the Grey Lady's apparition that night were two audience members watching from the stalls. One of the girls happened to look up at the famously haunted upper circle box and saw something that didn't look quite right. A lady was seated in the box, but she didn't appear to be altogether solid. The girl staring caught the attention of her companion, who also gawped at the odd misty figure in the box. And as the pair watched, they were dumbfounded to witness the grey figure evaporate as the lights dimmed and the curtain on stage began to rise. At this point, you might wonder if it had all been a trick of the light. Until, that is, the girls saw the ghost reappear on the stage. A column of mist briefly swirled next to the leading lady, who, having taken her place for the opening of the scene, was aghast to see this misty shape solidify into the form of a woman in an old-fashioned dress. Understandably, she stepped back in shock. The girls in the audience who had watched the whole bizarre thing transpire screamed, and chaos broke loose, with the cast beating a hasty retreat from the eerie spectacle, audience members clambering over seats in surprise and fright, and the leading lady gallantly trying to hold her position on the stage as the curtain was hastily brought down. It's said that after finishing the play's run, Dame Anna Neagle never returned to Bath's Theatre Royal, And really, who can blame her?
So, by now, we have met nearly the whole cast of ghostly characters in the new Theatre Royals company, except that most delicate of players, the Christmas butterfly. And as we move into the last act of this episode, we circle back to the place where we began, the annual Christmas pantomime. There are so many versions of this story floating around out there, both in books and on the internet. Some of them are very simple, reporting that every year, on Christmas morning, a single tortoiseshell butterfly inexplicably appears in Bath Theatre's auditorium and flutters around ethereally. Where it comes from, no one knows. And to be fair, this would be quite unusual, given that any self-respecting butterfly should really be hibernating through the chilly months of winter. Although it's not unheard of for them to be prematurely awoken from their slumber in barns, garages, or cool outhouses, given an unseasonably warm spell. But other versions of the tale are less magical and more portentous. A popular version tells that back in 1948, the theatre's director, Reg Maddox, had a large butterfly set piece built for that season's pantomime that was set to run from November through Christmas to January. But during rehearsals, actors and crew noticed a fragile butterfly tumble from seemingly out of nowhere down onto the stage, stone dead. Given the prominent butterfly theme of the show, this understandably didn't seem like a very good omen. And it wasn't, as only moments later, the director himself fell down dead right there on the stage. As you can imagine, many of the actors and crew felt that the butterfly had been a harbinger of doom and didn't want to go ahead with using the theme or the butterfly backdrop. But after cutting these things out of the production, a run of ill luck seemed to plague the theatre. This string of misfortunes continued until at one rehearsal, a live butterfly appeared right there on stage, fluttering daintily around for all to see. Taking this as a sign to go ahead with the butterfly theme after all, the cast and crew replaced the backdrop, and, sure enough, the fortunes of the theatre seemed to change for the better, and the pantomime season was a roaring success. I was surprised to read so many of these rather doomy versions of the butterfly story, having first come across the tale in the 1970s BBC documentary, in which the then owner of Bath's new Theatre Royal, Fred Maddox, son of director Reg Maddox, told the story in his own words. His version is rather more heartwarming, and of all people, he should know the truth of the butterfly story. The way Fred tells it, he had indeed rather suddenly found himself in charge of the Theatre Royal after the sad passing of his father in August of 1948. And whilst trying to plan the upcoming pantomime season, Fred had been leafing through his father's papers to find clues for what Reg's ideas for that production might have been. As it happened, his father had written notes about a spectacular butterfly ballet that he had envisaged, and, wanting to honour his father's memory by realising these plans, Fred set about making the butterfly ballet part of that season's festive production. In the Ghost Hunters documentary, Fred declares that he wrote the butterfly ballet into that Christmas pantomime 27 years ago, and that every year since, with just one single exception, either during the show's rehearsals or during the pantomime season itself, a single butterfly had appeared on stage or in the theatre. It's no surprise, of course, that Fred thinks the butterfly represents the spirit of his father, returning to visit his theatre every year. Fred says that people have questioned whether the butterfly story was just a publicity stunt. So one year, when it appeared as mysteriously as ever, and happened on this occasion to flutter into his office, Fred gently closed the door, shutting the tortoiseshell inside, and called the press. Reporters came down to the theatre with their cameras and were able to capture pictures of the butterfly posing calmly on Fred's hand. But this wouldn't be the only time the Christmas butterfly made a public appearance. In 1979, during the Christmas run of Aladdin, comedian and TV presenter Leslie Crowther was playing the character of Wishy Washy at Bath when he was surprised on stage mid-performance by a butterfly alighting on his shoulder right before the eyes of the whole cast, crew and audience. Fortunately, he had heard about the pantomime's patron spirit, so he gently released the butterfly safely into the wings, and when the show was over, he came back out on stage in front of the closed curtain to share with the audience the story of Bath's Christmas pantomime butterfly. That particular panto run is reported to have been a sellout success, leading everyone to believe that the appearance of the butterfly was a good omen. Even in recent years, the butterfly has put in the odd appearance, whether coincidentally or not, always seeming to coincide with sold-out shows, although it doesn't always seem to manifest in such corporeal form anymore. For the Christmas season of the year 2000, the pantomime running at Bath was Cinderella, and on the first day of rehearsals, the theatre's PR man had his own encounter with the ethereal butterfly, which appeared to him as a butterfly shape in the condensation of his bedroom window. His first thought was that the shape had appeared purely by accident, and he rubbed it away. But the butterfly shape returned. In fact, no matter how much he cleaned the window inside or out, the butterfly shape would not budge. It may come as no surprise that the panto that year was said to be quite the success. Maybe the most heartwarming of these stories, though, took place during the extensive theatre renovations of the 1980s. As far as I can tell, the theatre closed for refurbishment in June of 1981, only opening again in 1982, which means that the theatre would have missed a whole panto season. But somehow the butterfly still managed to make an appearance. This story came from some of the crew during their work clearing out an old storeroom during the refurb. They reportedly came across a dusty old locked box that obviously hadn't been opened in decades. And when they finally managed to prise the lid open, they were stunned to witness 6 tortoiseshell butterflies erupt from the previously sealed and dust-covered box and flutter away towards the stage. Inside the box were some yellowing documents dated 1932 and a photograph of Reg Maddox. Panto season or no panto season, Reg was obviously not one to miss his annual appearance at the Theatre Royal, and personally, I hope he never does. So, having now met all the players and heard their tales, I think that last unexplained but heartwarming occurrence is the perfect place to wrap up our final act. We could talk about theatre ghosts endlessly, it seems, as there are apparently so many. Nearly every theatre in the country seems to be haunted, and no wonder, for what more liminal places are there in the world than theatres? We will surely be revisiting the ghostly otherworld of theatres very soon, but for now, it's time for us to wish you all a merry and most haunted panto season, and as the bard himself says at the end of Twelfth Night, but that's all one, our play is done. Lights fade to black, curtain falls.
And that nearly brings us to the end of the show, but first, it wouldn't be Christmas without terrible jokes and the smell of gunpowder in the studio.
Yes, it is cracker time. Although, quickly just before we go into crackers, I just want to mention to everybody that we'll put a link in the show notes to a really cool website where you can take a 360-degree virtual tour of Bath's Theatre Royal. It's amazing. You know how on like Google Maps you can go into the street view and you can literally walk along the street? It's like that, but the whole inside of the theatre.
That's cool. All buildings should have that.
I know. It's so amazing.
Especially haunted ones.
Especially haunted ones. You can literally go up into this dress circle. You can go through the corridors and see the bars and see where the dandy haunts. You can go up into the dress circle. You can go into the haunted box, like where the grey lady sits, and you can look out at what her view from that box is down at the stage. It's really good. I highly suggest you go and check it out.
Now, everybody, are you ready for a little bit of cracker ASMR?
It wouldn't be Christmas without a party hat.
It would not be Christmas. I can't wear one because of my headphones.
Oh, that's sad.
Okay.
Oh, wait. Which one? Oh, okay. Cross my hands. Right. Ready? Oh, snap.
Oh, we won one each.
Oh, we got one each. That's
Hooray.
cool. Hooray. Well, I'm going to wear a party hat. Poor Fitz can't. Oh, there's my joke.
I
Better
shall
not lose
keep
that.
my party hat to one side so that I can wear it later.
I think last year one of them ended up on the Christmas tree.
Well, I've got two jokes in mine.
Oh, lucky you.
Well, I presume you do as well. They're both printed on the same bit of paper. And
yes, I do.
My toy is the mystery calculator, which I will look at later because it looks complicated.
Oh, I've got a crossword book.
Oh.
Cool.
So, why was Santa's little helper depressed?
I don't know.
Because he had low elf-esteem.
Oh, what's the other one? You might as well do two each.
Yep, the other one. What do you call people who are afraid of Santa Claus?
I don't know.
Claustrophobic.
Oh, dear. Right, you ready for mine?
I am.
It's going to be terrible. How many chimneys does Father Christmas go down? This is really awful.
All of them?
Stacks!
Oh, God.
What do ducks do before Christmas?
I don't know.
They pull their Christmas quackers.
Oh. Oh, man. Oh, it would not be Christmas without terrible, terrible cracker jokes.
And that, dear listeners, really does bring us to the end of this Christmas special episode of Not Once for Yes, and also the end of 2024. Thank you so much for joining us, for sharing your stories, and a huge thank you to our patrons and KOFY supporters, without whom we wouldn't be able to do what we do. We know that you understand how much effort goes into producing the show, and we are truly humbled by your support that helps us to pay for all of the stuff that goes into making it, from hosting costs, research material, fuel costs and entrance fees, software, hardware, and much, much more.
If you're not currently supporting the show and would like to, you can do so by becoming our patron from as little as $1 a month, or by making a donation through KOFY, the links to which can be found on our website. It all helps to keep the show running, and without filling up with sponsors and advertising. And hopefully, one day, it'll be enough to allow us to work on the show full time. We really do appreciate that it isn't easy for many people to support us financially, so please don't ever feel bad about not doing so. But if you do still want to help out, then please do rate and review the show on your podcast player of choice, subscribe on our YouTube channel, share the podcast with your friends, drop our name whenever you see people looking for a new paranormal podcast, and perhaps most importantly, keep sharing your paranormal encounters with us. Not Once for Yes is produced by my production company, Narrative Audio, and if you have a podcast and would like to outsource your editing and post-production, then please do get in touch, either through Not Once for Yes or narrativeaudio.com. We hope you enjoyed this special Christmas episode, and that you'll follow the path of weird with us again next year for some more spooky stories and haunted history on the next Not Once for Yes.
So the only thing left to say is that we wish you all a very Merry Christmas.